All right, so everyone, I wanted to give you all the rubric and how you're going to be scored on your essays. Last unit, I talked a lot about essays and I gave you a lot of scores on essays, but you all didn't know exactly how you were going to be scored. And so each analysis essay gets 6 points. And so this is how you can earn your points. So here's the scoring criteria. In the first row, you get 1 point if you respond to the prompt with a thesis that presents a defensible interpretation of the message. That means that you responded to the prompt, whatever it asked you to do, and your thesis basically makes sense. An example of a response that would not get a point, meaning you would get 0 points, would be that you only restated the prompt, that you made a generalized comment about the passage that doesn't respond to the prompt. All right, so here is an example of a thesis that is only restated and a strong thesis. Okay, so it says prompt. In the excerpt below from Lord of the Flies, the boys realize no one knows how to light a fire without matches, so they take Piggy's glasses to light it. After a short while, the fire goes out. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how the author uses literary elements, such as dialogue and selection of detail, to portray the complex situation the boys are in. Okay, so I need to be explaining how dialogue and selection of detail portrays the complex situation the boys are in. This is an example of a thesis that would not get points. This is an example of a thesis that would not get points. It says the author uses literary elements such as dialogue and selection of detail to portray the complex situation the boys are in. All they did was restate what they wrote up here. So that would not get a point. That would get 0 points. This is a strong thesis because you showed me how dialogue and selection of detail portray that the boys are in a complex situation by telling me that the complex situation is filled with uncertainty and fear. So I'm telling you how dialogue and details portray the boys are in a situation filled with uncertainty and fear. I'm answering the prompt. Okay, the prompt is really a question, and your thesis is a response. It's your answer. Now that you see how you would get points or not get points for the thesis, let's move on to the bottom. So you also would need evidence and commentary. This shows you how you will get points based off your evidence and commentary. You will have 0 points if all you do is restate the thesis, which we talked about before, or if you give me irrelevant information to the prompt, meaning you just start talking about, yeah, and they were really mean to Piggy. That had nothing to do with the prompt. So that is how remember when I tell you the evidence has to defend whatever your thesis is. It has to flow. It has to make sense. So if I talked about uncertainty and fear in my thesis statement, my evidence cannot be talking about happiness and satisfaction. It needs to be about uncertainty and fear. So it goes, the most points you can get depend on your evidence and you supporting all claims and line of reasoning, you consistently explaining how your evidence support your line of reasoning. So that means not only did you go back and find a quote from the passage, you didn't just copy and paste the quote, you explain how that shows uncertainty and fears. You explains how the dialogue builds on that uncertainty and fear. So that's how you can get 4 points. Now, your last point comes from whether or not you have sophistication. And sophistication is a broad term, but basically in order to earn this point, your writing has to be very persuasive. Meaning when I'm reading your story or your essay, when I'm reading your essay, it needs to persuade me to believe what you're writing. It needs to make sense. And it needs to go beyond just 3 sentences, because we know that 3 sentences is the minimum for a paragraph, meaning you did above and beyond. You weren't just writing fluff, though. You weren't just writing a whole bunch of stuff that didn't make sense. It all blended together, and I'm astonished, or I'm persuaded, or I'm taken aback by how greatly you wrote. So sophistication is that last point that you can earn. And normally, if you do not have a thesis, it's very hard to get this sophistication point because your work will not be sophisticated if you do not have a thesis. Because it doesn't flow. It doesn't tell me what are you trying to persuade me about. So in order to get the sophistication point, you have to really persuade me. And without a thesis, I don't know how I would be persuaded because I don't know what you're trying to persuade me for. That's why I tell you guys the thesis is one of the most important parts of your essay because everything builds off of that.